Professor Worgley's here. Did you figure out the error? I sure hope so. It's good to try some of these on your own. It's going to make you a better developer because in the industry, there's going to be times where something goes wrong and they didn't teach you that in school and you've never seen that before. What do? How do you figure out this error? Google it. Use your resources. Ask somebody else who has maybe seen that error before. These are all techniques and knowledge you need to learn before you get into the industry, because when you get into the industry, they don't want to teach you things. They want you to implement things. So what's the problem? The problem is I did not add my import. I need to add my import to the jQuery library. So how do I do that? It's just a script tag. It's an external script. I have one there in JSLibs. I'm going to use 2.1.4.min. And I've added my jQuery import here. This is very important. If you see this error, $ is not defined, either you forgot the import or your import is not working properly. Save the file, refresh the code, and you're going to see this here. Now, what's interesting is I have the onload event, and remember, HTML is loaded sequentially, so this function is first, but yet jQuery prints out the message first. And in fact, jQuery will change the HTML, and it's going to say jQuery changed this right here. But then the JavaScript is ran second because you can see this print statement here, and then it overrides the jQuery. So it's going to say the DOM has loaded. Now, what's going on there? Now, this is a test question, and you should know this for the exam. When I use onload, it's the original JavaScript onload event, and it's going to wait for images, scripts, and other assets to download. So let's write a note and make sure we're all clear. I'm going to use a JavaScript multi-line comment. I'm going to write a few comments here. So first one is, before we used to use the body elements onload attribute to wait for the DOM to load. When you do this, it's going to include images, scripts, and other assets to download. Let's say I have a 4K image and my internet speeds are slow. If I do the onload event, the image needs to finish loading, and then the JavaScript function will be triggered. To just wait for the DOM, we can use the jQuery's ready function. This does not wait for images, scripts, and other assets to download. As soon as the DOM finishes loading, this jQuery ready function will be executed, which is why you'll see it loads first. So there's going to be an exam question. It's going to be similar to this. You're going to see an onload. You're going to see it call a JavaScript function, and you're going to see the document ready, and it's going to ask you which one's going to be loaded first. jQuery will always be loaded first. The next thing it's going to ask you is why? Because JavaScript needs to wait for images, scripts, and other assets to download, whereas jQuery, as soon as the DOM's finished loading, even though the images are still loading, this jQuery function will be activated because we don't need to wait for all the content to load. We just want to make sure we have the DOM loaded so I can grab IDs or classes or elements, and they'll actually take effect. So the jQuery ready function is much quicker because I don't have to wait for all the other assets to load. Another important thing to note is if I print this message out here, if I do a console directory on message up here, and I do a console directory on message down here, let's see what the differences are. Save the code, refresh the browser. You'll see this is actually a jQuery object. Remember we did this with JavaScript. It says a paragraph tag with ID message. I open this up. Here's all my DOM attributes like inner HTML or .value like we saw before. If I open up this jQuery object, it's a little bit different. You'll see it's an array. And once I open up the array, I then have the regular DOM attributes like I had before. So there you'll see the first 5 are access key align, assign slot, attributes, and if I open up the array, you'll see the same. Access key align, assign slot, attributes, auto capitalize. So it's a little bit different. It's a jQuery object versus a DOM object. And there's a difference there. You're going to be asked that on the exam. If you see the $, and I save that to a variable, this is going to be a jQuery object, whereas if you use the DOM and get element by ID, that's going to be a DOM object. And they're almost the same, just a little bit different. Let's write some notes so you remember that. Remember, if I use a $ and select something, it's going to return a jQuery object representing the ID message versus a DOM element, which we saw earlier. And here, when I do the .html, I'm essentially changing the contents of ID message to whatever string I have. And then this second line was just a shorthand to show you how we would do it in the industry. But I want to have the code line by line the same. So I have a console log, store it to a variable, print out the directory, and then change the inner HTML. So they're line by line the same, but in the industry, we would just write it all on one line. Okay, so we've learned a lot here. We learned jQuery loads before the DOM. We see how we can use the ready function in replace to the onload. We see that when I use a $, it's actually a jQuery object. And let's take this onload off just to make sure that the jQuery function will still load even if I don't have the onload event. Okay, so I have a body without an onload. I'm going to save it, refresh. Now you'll see jQuery change this. The JavaScript function is not called. The jQuery function is still called and still prints out the message and the jQuery object. So I don't even need the onload anymore when I'm using the .ready function. But if I have both, you'll want to know that jQuery will be called first because it does not need to wait for images, scripts, styles, and other assets to load. Stick with Professor Wergeles. We're going to go back to the slides. Let's take a look at some more concepts, and we'll look at another real-world example. We'll see you in the next video.